Okay, hi everyone. I hope that you can hear me. I'd just like to welcome you and thank you for attending today. My name is Mandy and this is my colleague Debbie.
Hi.
And today we're going to be talking about the Fighting Alcohol and Offending Interventions Targeting Aboriginal Girls project, more fondly known as the YAWG project. So there was meant to be three of us presenting today, but unfortunately Jocelyn Jones is unwell, so you just have myself and Debbie. So I'd like to start by acknowledging the YAWG people, traditional custodians of this land on which we meet, and we wish to acknowledge the strength of their continuing culture and offer our respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'd also like to make some other acknowledgements before we start, particularly to our funders, Healthway. Healthway has always been very supportive of community-driven local research, which is very important because we need local data around the issues that we're talking about today. Our research partners, Wungening Aboriginal Corporation, the other investigators on the project, a mixture of Aboriginal and non-Aboriginal researchers, our research associate who conducted the majority of the interviews for this project and ran the workshop that we'll talk to you about, NDRI June, particularly the girls and young women who participated in the research, the organisations who supported it and helped facilitate recruitment of young Aboriginal girls and women. Also, three generations of the one family, Laurel Nannup, Brett Nannup and Lily Wilsons, who were the artists for the YAWG website. And you'll see some of that artwork when Debbie takes you through the website. And Taya Jamison, who took the challenge and designed the logo for our research, which is on another slide in a few slides. Okay, so today's presentation, we're offering a background and overview of the YAWG research. We'll summarise some of the key findings. We won't have time to summarise all of them today, but there'll be a link to the final report in the website. Debbie will take you for a tour of the YAWG website. So this is an opportunity to share the voices of the girls and young women who participated in the research. So the background to YAWG. So the idea for YAWG actually came from another project that a number of the investigators on this project were involved in, and this was Drinking in the Suburbs, the experiences of young Aboriginal people. This was later renamed It Can Break a Night, or It Can Make a Night or Break a Night. This was also a Healthway funded project. This was a collaboration between researchers here at NDRI and Mordich Keeler. So it emerged because elders and community members and service providers were wanting to know more about what was happening for their Aboriginal youth in the metropolitan area, particularly around drinking, riding the trains and getting in trouble with the police. So they wanted to do this in order for services to be better able to respond to young people's needs. So when the results were disseminated to the researchers, expert advisory group and in an Aboriginal community forum, particular concern was expressed about the findings relating to the 13 female participants. So all young people spoke about being involved in fighting, drinking and offending. And many of the female participants were consuming alcohol at levels which placed them at a heightened risk of harm. So the young women in the study were also reporting participation in fighting, largely with other females, and this was leading to significant injury to themselves and others, and also a low-level contact with police. So these findings were similar to what the young men talked about. However, the young women were less likely to report speaking with others about these issues or to be linked in with service providers and support services. So on the basis of these findings, when we disseminated these back to the community, they wanted to know more about what was going on for this young group of women. So that is how the YAWG project came about. So the YAWG project focuses on Aboriginal girls and young women between the ages of 10 and 18 in the Perth metropolitan area. And this is the logo that I was talking about that Taya Jamison drew for the project. So the key things that it sought to do was to generate knowledge around their experiences of and attitudes towards fighting, drinking and offending, identified intervention points and strategies for preventing the progress of these behaviours that increase the potential for negative consequences among this group, Because of the participatory action research approach to the research, it empowered young girls to take a lead role in developing and promoting health messages, which I think is a really important approach in any sort of research of this type. And it informed the development of a training resource to improve service provider and community knowledge around the issues that were facing these young girls. So important improvements have occurred in narrowing the health and life expectancy gap between Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people and non-Indigenous Australians, including children and young people. So the Overcoming Indigenous Disadvantage report from 2020 highlighted a decrease in infant and child mortality rates, an increase in child attendance at early childhood education before school, and gains made in numbers of Aboriginal young people completing secondary education and certificate qualifications. So these are important improvements. However, Aboriginal children and young people in Australia today continue to experience greater levels of disadvantage than their non-Aboriginal counterparts in most health and socio-economic indicators. So in a recent report, June Oscar, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Social Justice Commission, identified that Aboriginal girls and women in particular as one of the most marginalised and politically disenfranchised groups in Australia, and consequently one of the most vulnerable groups. So her report is based on research that she and her team did. They travelled around Australia and spoke to up to 2,300 girls and Aboriginal women about some of the issues that we're talking about today. So it's very important that we do pay attention and listen to what it is needed to support this group of young women. So alcohol use among young people. Well, surveys have shown some positive trends in terms of drinking among young people. In general, the age at which young people first try alcohol has increased from around 14 or just under 15 years to 16.2 years. There has been an increase in the proportion of young people who do not consume alcohol also. So these trends have been noticed in the last few years. However, when young people do drink, a proportion will drink at very high levels, binge drinking on a single occasion, which place them at greater risk of experiencing harm. And harm from alcohol-related accident or injury is experienced disproportionately by younger people. So that group of people, as far as the age cohort goes, experiences alcohol-related accident and injury at a greater level than any other age cohort. Alcohol use among Aboriginal people. Well, reliable data on alcohol use among Aboriginal people are hard to come by. Small sample sizes in national surveys and what is available are most likely underestimates. However, we do know that alcohol is a key risk factor contributing to the health gap between Aboriginal and non-Indigenous Australians, and it's been implicated in contributing to intentional self-harm, suicide, land transport accidents, cirrhosis, and other diseases of the liver, and assault and homicide. However, it's important to note that overall more Aboriginal people abstain from alcohol. However, among those that do consume alcohol, a higher proportion drink at risky levels. They are also more likely than non-Aboriginal people to experience an alcohol-related injury. So when we look at Aboriginal females, again, we don't have a lot of good data to go with, but it's a similar sort of pattern. So Aboriginal females greater than 15 years are less likely to have consumed alcohol in the last 12 months, but they're more likely to consume alcohol at high-risk levels than non-Aboriginal females. So 13% of young Aboriginal women in the NATS from 2014-15 drank at levels exceeding health guidelines on single occasions, compared to 9.7% in the general female population. So I think you'd have to have your head stuck in the sand if you didn't know about the really devastating statistics around Aboriginal children and young people in the criminal justice system. They're very overrepresented in our Australian criminal justice system. So Aboriginal children and young people tend to enter the system younger than their non-Aboriginal peers. In 2017-18, 5% of young people aged 10 to 17 years were Aboriginal in Australia in the general population, and yet they constituted 49% of those involved in the criminal justice system. So that's in community supervision and detention. And Aboriginal youth were 23 times more likely than non-Aboriginal young people to be in detention on any one day in 2019. In September, in Western Australia, in September in 2020, there were 9 females in detention at Banksia Hill Detention Centre, and that made up 12.3% of all those detained. Of these, 8 were young Aboriginal women. Okay, so first, some points to consider before we actually speak a bit more about the data that we collected and the research that we've done. The issues that we talk about today are not only issues faced by Aboriginal families and communities, and they're not necessarily representative of the experiences of all Aboriginal girls and young women. And some of the stories that you'll hear and see from the website, you know, these can be challenging and confronting, but we also need to understand that a lot of the behaviours and what the young women speak about must be understood within the historical context of colonisation, which is characterised by dispossession, loss of culture and government policies, which condone the removal of children from families and has led to breakdown of kinship systems and high levels of intergenerational trauma for many families that continue to resonate today. Okay, so our data collection and analysis. So we conducted qualitative interviews with 38 young girls and women aged between 10 and 18. The interviews were conducted by our research associate, Nari Pigram, who's a YAWG woman from Broome, who was in Perth at the time of the research project. There was a semi-structured interview schedule, so we had some questions that we wanted to ask the young women, but the interviews were conducted in a very yarning style. And the questions that we asked were, we had a group of young girls and women who took part in a reference group, and so they helped us with the questions, with the right way of asking these questions. So it was it was a yarning, very qualitative kind of approach to talking to the young women. And interviews took between 20 minutes and 1.5 hours. They were all recorded and then they were transcribed by an external party. And they were entered into NVivo and analysed using a grounded theory approach. So we also did a 1-day intensive workshop with 6 young women. I won't be speaking about those findings today, but Debbie will be giving a little bit of an overview of the workshop and some of the findings and the approaches taken for that workshop. So who were the girls and young women? So they were average age of 14.5 years. The majority was still at school. 4 had part-time employment, 15 reported having a partner. 1 was a mother and pregnant with her second baby, and another was pregnant with her first. All resided in Perth, however, not all had been raised in Perth. So we had some young women who were from the Pilbara who were down boarding at school in Perth. We also had a number of participants from the Kimberley area. Okay, so the background about the girls and young women's lives. So several of them, well, more than several, probably the majority spoke about having caring responsibilities for younger siblings. Several spoke about absent fathers and mothers in their lives, and this was due to either an incarcerated parent, alcohol and drug use. They had lost a parent. And while we didn't quantify experiences of grief, loss and trauma, many young women spoke about these issues, and these included death of family members, incarceration of parent, family violence and intimate partner violence and sexual assault. Most of the young women were from single separated parent families and or living with extended family, and there were a number who were involved in the child protection system. So it's very important to point out that adversity did not always dictate high-risk behaviour around drinking, fighting, offending, or determine their ability to make positive choices in their lives. Okay, so to the findings. In terms of alcohol, we had 13 participants who had never tried alcohol. Most of these young women had witnessed others drinking, including when the drinking had resulted in alcohol-fuelled violence, and for some this had influenced their decision not to drink themselves. A number of these participants spoke about acting as protectors to their friends who did drink, so making sure that they got home safely, acting as the skipper driving the car, and also to siblings when drinking was taking place in the home. So girls spoke about making sure that their younger siblings were safe, either by removing them from the house and going to Nana's house down the road, or locking them in a room and to ensure that they were safe. Of those who had tried alcohol, 68% had done so by 14 years, so that's quite early initiation into alcohol, and some of the young women spoke about having tried alcohol by the time they were 10. Most initial experience with alcohol took place with family members and in the home generally. So the home and consuming alcohol with family was perceived by several participants to be a safe option. So if you look at the quotes on the side, because my dad's always said, if you're going to try something, be at home and be safe. Good experiences on alcohol were described as drinking and having fun, with mainly female friends and family members, and the absence of alcohol-related harm. So like everyone was just dancing, so there was no arguing. Bad times were characterised by being sick, being mobbed or fighting, experiencing sexual assault, and making decisions they later regretted. So I know every time I drink, and I usually end up in a fight, a punch-up, but... So given that Aboriginal juveniles and young adults are disproportionately overrepresented in the criminal justice system, and Aboriginal people today are more likely to be incarcerated than any other time in the Royal Commission into Aboriginal deaths in custody, it's a really positive finding that 2/3 of the young women in our study had not been involved with the criminal justice system. And of those who had, it was commonly for more minor offences, such as being out after curfew, property damage, shoplifting. No, nothing serious, just being taken home. We had 4 participants who had previously been detained in West Australia's only juvenile facility, Banksia Hill. So Banksia Hill serves the entire state of WA. So any young people who have committed serious enough crimes that they need to go to detention will come down to the Perth-based facility. So all 4 had been charged with violent offences. Apparently, I hit a woman at Claysbrook. When the policewoman grabbed me, she slammed me up against the wall. I just turned around and started hitting her. Those with more extensive involvement with the justice system did describe contact with child protection services, intergenerational offending and parental incarceration, family breakdown and regular and heavy alcohol use, all of which have been recognised as risk factors in an Aboriginal person's pathway into the justice system. However, it's really important to note that family played an important role in young people's decisions to desist from offending, as well, as you'll see in that last quote. Mum and Dad told me it's not the right thing to do. So it was also a protective factor. So all participants in this study have witnessed a fight, and 65% have been involved in fights themselves. So most participants who had engaged in fighting had had their first fight by the age of 13, with some as young as 10. Most fights involved physical force and were against same-sex peers largely, mainly other Aboriginal girls and young women, but also not. And alcohol was not always involved. In fact, only a small percentage of the fights that the young women were talking about had alcohol and or other drugs involved. So there was a variety of reasons for why girls fight, which were given to us, in particular jealousy, racism, rumour spreading and slurs against family. I think that was the biggest one, was the slurs against family and defending family. As soon as you say something about my friends or my family, you've got to watch out because I flip then. When initiated by the young women themselves, participants' fighting was both instrumental, so it was aiming to achieve a future goal, for example, to teach another girl a lesson or to sort of improve reputation for fighting, and expressive, so emerging spontaneously out of rage or anger. So some young women just spoke about blacking out and just finding themselves so enraged that they physically fought. While some young women reported serious injuries, and they had also caused some serious injuries to others, and they did feel remorse for fighting, it was apparent that fighting also came with social and cultural capital, self-esteem, a release of anger, and in some cases, pleasure. So there were a number of peacemakers amongst the participants, young women who had never participated in a fight, or else young women who used to engage in these behaviours but then chose not to continue with them. And these women spoke about either intervening in fights or trying to intervene and stop other young women fighting, or refusing to be goaded into fighting themselves. But they said that it was quite a difficult space to occupy because there was a lot of pressure on them to be fighters. We also asked the young women their thoughts on non-physical and non-violent strategies instead of actually engaging in physical fighting. And you'll see from the last quote that's on the screen. So while talking and walking away were the two key strategies that were put forward by the young women for solving issues without violence, for most this had not worked or was not considered a realistic option in all situations. So you're taught to get your anger out physically. That's how I think most of us deal with it. I can't see myself sitting down and going, this is what's wrong, let's sort it out. That's not going to happen. That's not how it works. So we also asked women about their support networks and the person that they most admired. So a family member was the source of support for most young women, as well as featuring as those who they most admired, particularly grandparents in that case. Elders are important contributors within Aboriginal families, and many participants spoke respectfully and with admiration about their grandparents. So few young women spoke about turning outside of the family network for support. So you'll see my grandma, she's like the culture, she's the most cultural one in the group. But then when we also looked a bit deeper at family, there were some young women who did not feel able to draw support from their families. And this was for a variety of reasons. Some reported that their families were not well equipped to help them deal with stress and other emotions. Others, such as the young woman in the bottom quote, were very aware that their families were going through a lot of things as well, like other family members, so they didn't want to burden them. So they tended to keep a lot of their stuff to themselves. So the role of family support in addressing challenges was not a key focus of this research. However, it is an important finding, requiring further consideration as it emphasises the additional support that families, as well as these young women, need around these issues. Okay, so before I hand over to Debbie to give you the tour of the YAWG website, I just want to say a few things about it. It's important to remember that the website wasn't developed because there's no good programs or services for Aboriginal girls and young women that exist. We know that there are, and we know that there's a lot of good work going around. And nor did the young women only have negative things to say about their experiences with services and with school, and in their interactions with police and with organisations that sought to engage and support them. However, what was really clear that came out of both the interview data and the workshop was that women could clearly identify barriers to reaching out for help and to the acceptance of help. And a lot of this was guided by their fear. So they were fearful, in particular, about being taken away from their families. That was very real fear. And also about what negative might happen if they do reach out for help. And also the fear of not actually being understood. So despite these barriers, young women wanted to be understood and heard by those working and coming into contact with them. They felt that increased understanding of their lives by service providers, so they're talking about educators, they're talking about police, they're talking about child protection workers, transit officers, you know, the whole gamut, would lead to better opportunities, relationships and outcomes for young women. So the YAWG website is an invitation to you from the participants to see behind their curtains. So one of the young women in the workshop kind of coined that phrase, behind our curtains. We wanted you to know what it is that's happening for us. So the phrase behind my curtain became an important metaphor for understanding the women's daily lives and experiences, most of which they felt were concealed from and foreign to others. So further information on how the website was put together can be found in our final report, and there's a link on the website to that final report. And lastly, I'm not sure how many of you saw Mitch Tambo on Q&A the other night. If you didn't see it, it's really worth tuning in. It was for Reconciliation Week. It was a special episode, and I think I want to just read out what he said here because I think it's very poignant and very timely and something that we should be considering when we're working with this cohort. I think it's important that we educate teachers, we educate educators, and we get to the kids because the reality is that's where we've got a greater scope to build capacity, build empathy, and build a heart that's geared towards hearing our story, sitting with us and hearing our truths. There was a statistic the other day that 41% in out-of-home care are Aboriginal. Our kids that are in foster care, our kids have been taken away, have still been taken away. We have got a new generation of stolen generations. Our young people need all of you because our young people are killing themselves. Our young people are dying every day. What we need is to grow capacity for our story. Okay, so I'll hand over to Debbie, who will give you a tour of your website.
Okay, so hi everyone. I help design and implement the YAWG website. So as Mandy said, I'll be giving a tour of the site today and how it can be used for those who work and come into contact with young Aboriginal women and girls. So, for example, it'd be useful for teachers, counsellors, youth workers, police, transit officers, etc. So, following the completion of the interviews and initial analysis of the interview data, we conducted a workshop with 6 young women to inform the development of a health promotion resource. So, the workshop was led by Nari Pigram, the research associate, and the process was to ensure that a participatory framework of the research was maintained and to ensure the young women could directly educate service providers and influence and shape the provision of future services. So the purpose of the workshop was to speak more in depth about young women about the issues covered in this research and to collect their ideas about the creation of a training package or a resource for service providers. So the intention was to help service providers in their work with young Aboriginal women experiencing drinking, fighting and offending behaviours and their associated risks to health. So some of the questions that guided the conversations are included in this slide. So why do and don't young women reach out? What could go wrong if you reached out for help? So 2 key themes emerged from the yarning sessions, which include the importance of addressing barriers of accessing services and that participants felt that majority of teachers and others only saw young women's behaviour and not the story behind their behaviour. Okay, so it was clear from the workshop group that finding a platform from which to share their stories is in an audiovisual format. So the preference was for the training package or resource because they wanted service providers to understand their realities rather than just tell them how they should be working. So combining the data from interviews and the materials, thoughts and stories collected from the workshop participants, a pilot website was developed out of it. So a pre and post evaluation of a pilot website was conducted for the research. So 2 key factors were measured, including the changes in participants' understanding and comfort working with young Aboriginal women. So participants were asked how much they agreed with 6 statements on a 5-point scale. So 1 was strongly agree, 5 was strongly disagree, and before and after viewing the website. So we also measured acceptability and utility of the website. So to examine the acceptability and utility of the website, participants were asked a range of questions about the website post-test. So participants were asked to rate the impact of the website on a 5-point scale again, 1 being strongly disagree, 5 being strongly agree. Okay, so our findings. So broadly speaking, findings highlighted a lack of understanding about the issues young Aboriginal women are dealing with and the barriers to help seeking before participants viewed the website. So participants reported feeling they had a better understanding and an increased comfort in working with young Aboriginal women after viewing the website. So the website did show promise. Based on the feedback of participants, the changes were made to the pilot website. So, for example, the need of some technical improvement around improving the navigation and loading of videos, links to resources and adding more factual research and information about drinking, fighting and offending in the target population, more information on developing healthy engagement pathways in addition to static referral sources was an important suggestion for us. So, and providing more information or caution for people viewing the website about what might be heard to ensure the website is trauma informed. So these areas of improvement have been addressed in the website you'll view today. So we're just going to proceed with the website tour now. Just bear with me while I load it. So, okay. Okay, so hopefully everyone can see it. All right, so it should be loaded. Okay, so at the top of the page, you can see that you can visit us here at yawg.info. So the content of the website is both uplifting and acknowledging the strengths of many young women, but it also raises some challenging topics from their lives. So at the top of the page here, there are quick links to the key content of the website, and this information can also be accessed by scrolling down through the page. Okay, so there's an overview here about the YAWG project and how it led to the development of this website. So we'll scroll down a bit more. Okay, so this video here and the text below is a welcome to the website from Nairi Pigram. Nairi was the research associate in this study, as we already mentioned, and she recruited and interviewed the young women you'll hear about today. So we encourage you to watch her short clip and read her story. Okay, so we've got some links here to why and how to use this website. So we'll just first click on why this website. Okay, so the brief text in this page gives you the context of the website. If you share this website with your networks, we recommend they read this section so they have an understanding of what this website is about and what we are trying to achieve. Okay, so we'll move on to how to use this website. Okay, so on this page, we provide you with an overview of the key ways of using this resource. So it's for professional development, how to use this website when working with young women, and how to use this website for organisational development. So I'll take you through each of these sections here. So for professional development, we've provided a 6-step learning structure you may wish to follow. So within these steps, we've included a link to the final YAWG report and a link to the ebook from the first research project, Make a Night, Break a Night, which Mandy already gave a background on. So alternatively, you may just wish to follow the themes set out on the website. So this is first by listening and reading the young women's stories and later reflecting on how the material may be useful in your own work. So keep scrolling down. Okay, so when working with young women, you can also share this website with them to support discussion and engagement. So as described in this section, watching some of the stories in this website with a young person can be a useful icebreaker to have a meaningful conversation with them. And using this website for organisational development. So this is to better understand how your organisation can work better with the young women by using their voices to guide you. So by sharing this website with the young women, organisations can discuss what works and what doesn't work when they access and interact with support and other services. So we're going to bring you now to the core content of the website. Our first one here, our words. Okay, so this next section, our words, provides quotes from the young women on the topics of drinking, fighting and offending, which were the key subjects of inquiry for the broader YAWG research project. So these quotes are written in verbatim, so they are the voices of the young women. Okay, so we'll just jump to fighting. So around fighting, some women did talk about how fighting was a way to deal with feeling angry. So for example, you're taught to get your anger out physically. That's how I think most of us deal with it. Another young woman talked about getting a kind of peace from fighting. Okay. So the next section, we'll just scroll down. So alcohol. The young women described in this section, their experiences around drinking. So for example, I tried it when I was really young because it was always around. I probably had my first drink in year 8. So someone else detailed that when they're drinking, they're very social, but they don't drink around people they don't know or trust. Okay, so we'll scroll down to the offending section. Okay, so the offending section presents quotes around the young women's experiences around crime, including their family and friends' experiences around offending. So the young woman in this first quote explains why she believes people steal. I've seen stealing, they do it for a purpose, like they'll steal spaghetti meat because they need to feed the family for the night. Okay, so another young woman talks about how most of her friends have been to Banksia for break-ins and stealing cars, and that her family members have also been inside. So I stay away because I know better, I go to school and I try to stay away from that. Okay. There's another quote here about one young woman's personal experience with offending at Perth train station. I was about to get in the last train, and before that, apparently I hit a woman. I don't know, I don't remember. I was drunk and she said something to me. And we also included one section here about the person they admired most or provided them with support, which was a question asked of participants. So Mandy already talked about this and provided some data around it. So, for example, one young woman talked about her grandmother and how she taught her a lot about her culture. Another about a young woman's mother and how she's been the only person she's ever had. So with this website discussing some heavy topics, we felt that it was best to end this section on a positive note. Okay, so now we're just going to move to the voices part on the website. So these are the stories of the young women. This section provides a useful insight into the experiences of young Aboriginal women and what they've had around, drinking, fighting and offending, which helps service providers better understand why and how young women engage in these high-risk activities and what areas of risk they can discuss with the young women. Okay, so we'll scroll down. So we have short audio stories and they're broken into themes. So we encourage you to listen to these themes in order unless you're focusing on a specific area of need. So these stories, they take you on a journey through understanding the context of the young women's lives, their lives at the critical age of 10 years, their experiences with racism, their experiences at school, their struggles in talking about issues such as alcohol use, fighting and offending, how they would like service providers to engage with them, and lastly, their visions for their future. So all these sections provide several audio stories to listen to and were narrated by young Aboriginal women. So we'll just play a few to show you. So we'll start with one from behind my curtain. This one here.
What they should be asking depends on what it's about. They should be asking why it happened. Say if a teacher responds to a fight and then looking behind the actual picture, what's going on at home and stuff, but not being direct about it, but like being indirect, if you get what I mean. And then perhaps they'll understand and think, well, one of my students was being a bitch yesterday and maybe she had something wrong. Because I grew up in a home all my life with DV and drugs and alcohol and teachers just there thinking that I'm a normal child.
Okay, so we'll play for another one. So what was happening for me at 10. So you can go back to the links up here and just click, any area that you might be interested in listening to. So play another one. It's a bit different, this one here.
You know that your life is a bit different from other kids at school. I'd go to my white friends' houses and everything would be like a movie. It'd be so normal. And they would hug and stuff and I'm like, what? And I'm like, what the hell? That's so weird. And they'd have all their washing and stuff folded up. Dinner was made and all that. And so I couldn't talk to them about it because they didn't know what I was on about. Yeah, makes you feel a bit alone. You know that your life is a bit...
Sorry about that. Okay, and we'll play one more while we don't talk about these issues. So scroll down. This one here.
Well, it's not that we don't like to talk, it's just the situations we're given to talk are to people who don't understand or people who are going to say that's a typical Aboriginal problem. I feel like we don't speak up because no one would understand where we're coming from and why we do what we do. Plus, trying to talk about your issues of being a blackfella, you're not going to get very far in an hour session.
Okay, so we're just going to go back to the home page to finish viewing the website. Okay, so I'm just going to scroll down for a little bit. Okay, so the reports and background. So you'll see some additional resources here from this project, such as the one-page fact sheets summarising some of the key findings from the research and information from our earlier project where we both talked to where we talked to both young Aboriginal women and men about drinking alcohol. Okay, so it's all here. We also have a contact form here, so if you ever wish to get in touch with us, you can reach us through this form. Okay, and the end of the website lists those who we're grateful to for providing their assistance in developing this website. There's also a message of thanks here from NDRI to the girls and young women who participate in this research.